Well, thanks for everybody coming along today. It's been a great basis project, and I'm really happy to be here this evening talking about my passion, which is ancient sites such as Avebury and Stonehenge, and ley lines, and earth energies, and sacred water. So my presentation is going to show you a few little bit of a difference with ley lines. And we're going to start off talking about leys because a lot of people say to me, do you know, it was Alfred Watkins who first mentioned the name ley. And that's what we know through books like The Old Straight Track. And it was Alfred Watkins who coined the term ley, but it wasn't really, because the first mention of ley lines goes way, way, way back. And it was documented by Dr. John Dee. And this is at the top. This is your classic Cotswold ley of Alfred Watkins' fame. And all it has is like various ancient sites cited upon in a linear line like this. And he said they're called leys. But Dr. John Dee, who was working with Edward Kelly for Queen Elizabeth I, wrote, "The true mathematical science is that which measureth the invisible lines, immortal beams, which can pass through cold and turf, hill and dale. It was for this reason it was accounted by all ancient priests the chiefest science, for it gave them both power in their words and works." So leys were recognized hundreds and hundreds of years ago, and it was only in the occult libraries that the knowledge of leys was passed on. And Alfred Watkins was in the know with a particular book written by Dr. John Dee, and that's how we today know about ley lines. But there's more to the ley than just a straight track like this. I'm going to show you how the ancients created a massive ley line linking Avebury to Stonehenge, linear through the landscape, going right the way up to the tip of Scotland. But not just that, all of the planets were in a particular alignment, and they brought the planets to Earth by placing sacred sites where the planets should be in heaven. But throughout history, there have been wars over ley lines. There have been wars over ancient sites. In fact, in our relative history, in the Second World War, we have here Hitler with Himmler, and his first real chore, if you will, for the Second World War was when they invaded Poland, they had to get these stone circles cordoned off from the general public. They're called the Odry stone circles in Poland. This is a very significant ley here and a very significant ley here. In fact, it was Himmler that invested a lot into dowsing, because they thought that dowsing for particular frequencies and particular colours could help them win the war. So Hitler, for example, he focused on two frequencies that go right the way throughout Europe, and that's the white frequency and the red frequency. And that's why they had those colours in their new flag for the Nazis. So we can see, you know, again, the powers that be really do know all about these types of ley systems. In fact, he was, you know, granted that you must be successful in your dowsing school. And I have been taught by German geomancers, my late father, and Chinese geomancers alike. In fact, I can assure you that in the European Parliament, there are top dowsers now who every now periodically they get in touch with my family to say that there's an activation happening. These are unelected people in Europe. So round about the same time as Alfred Watkins had that straight ley that we saw, the Cotswold ley, in the same year, there was a French researcher who was looking into the ley line phenomena, and he looked at this place called Geneva. This is where a lot of world decisions are taken. This whole system radiates 24 lines around like this, and the CERN particle accelerator is in this section here. But he coined the same name, ley. But all these little names you can see here, and the font's far too small to read, they all mean the same thing, a power place to which people travelled. And that was their old term. So these were continually used throughout time. And the Romans, they were also very aware of the ley line system, and they activated and used these lines here. So even today in Geneva, where we make a lot of decisions, it's on a ley line system. And that was much more sophisticated than Alfred Watkins. But these French researchers, again, looked towards the colour and the frequency, which we're going to be looking at later. And even in England, again, going way, way back to the Druidic priesthood, and that's, up until the Roman invasion from about 750 BC to 43 AD, the ley lines were being mapped out. And here's one system here, and they're roughly 12 miles apart throughout the kind of British Isles. And this is a very famous ley line, often called the Spine of Albion, researched by Gary Biltcliffe and Caroline Hall. But this is like an activation system. So we need to think of ley lines as being kind of an artery, blood of the system. And that if you can somehow activate it or deactivate it, you can control the land upon which you live. And that's what Himmler was doing with the old dry stone circles in Poland. They had ritual after ritual after ritual there. But one ley line system that has really fascinated me came from the occult library. It came from the occult library quite close to Stonehenge, and it was rediscovered by the Reverend Edward Duke. He was an antiquarian, that's your kind of old-fashioned archaeologist, if you will. And today, Sting lives in that house. It's a really big, posh house in West Amesbury. But from this occult library, Edward Duke discovered this ley line here. It links Stonehenge at the bottom all the way through to Venus up here. And each one of these ancient sites, we have Stonehenge, Casterly Camp, Marden, Walker's Hill, that's a site called Adam's Grave, Avebury here, Silbury in the middle, and Venus represented by a stone circle in Winterbourne Bassett. So he investigated this system, and it seemed like in this ancient library that all of these ancient sites represented a planet. For example, we have Stonehenge in the south, and that was represented by the orbital planet of Saturn. And it's really interesting to note that Stonehenge has 30 gigantic lintels going around, creating a perfect circle, on top of which are 30 massive lintels, probably weighing up to about 4 tons, and there's 30 of them. And it takes roughly 30 years for Saturn to do one round of the zodiac. So the symbolism is great within this mighty ley line system. And when we come up the ley and we meet with Jupiter, Jupiter is really the largest planet in our solar system. And this is reflected in the fact that the largest Druid core, and a core means college, it was a place of learning for the Druids. This is the largest camp in the whole of Wessex. And again, the people that are the shadow government, call them what you will, they're very aware of all the symbolism of the ancient cores, because one top core was Oxford University, and they still use that today to meet up to discuss finances, which isn't reported in the news, and I'll touch upon that later. But this ley line system we're going to see really anchors celestial energies and brings them down to Earth. And Silbury Hill, just down the road, is right in the center of this ley here. It represents the planet Earth. And when we have a look, I know John Cowie touched on Silbury Hill earlier, and I've done my own research on Silbury, and a lot of archaeologists and researchers alike see it as a step pyramid. You see it as an earthen mound, but beneath that earthen mound you have massive chalk block. Yeah, this isn't a pile of earth. And I was really outraged last year when I met top archaeologist Jim Leary of Silbury Hill fame, and he was talking on camera. We were both invited to do a Channel 4 film, and he was saying that, how they built Silbury was they all got a little basket. All these families apparently had all these little baskets all full of earth, and they put it all down in a pile, and lo and behold, you have Silbury Hill. And I said, Jim, you know that's absolute bullshit. Why are you saying it? So yes, these were massive chalk blocks, inside of which was layered. It was layered organic, inorganic, organic, inorganic. It was a massive orgone generator. Second to none. I know a really great left-brain chap called David Webb, and he comes out with me and he said, I'm going to measure the electrostatic field that John Cowie was talking about. And he took a control sample here in the ditch here, because it's surrounded by a big moat ditch. And then we took a signal from the top, and it was 1,000 times greater at the top to down here. It is still activated. This represents the planet Earth. Yeah. So when we go to Silbury, we need to think of the solar system in the surrounding landscape. And the symbolism that follows with the planets, again, is quite unique. Because when we go further down the ley line and we meet the planet Mercury, we go to a wonderful site called Adam's Grave. Has anyone been to Adam's Grave? Yay, you've been to Adam's Grave. It's a wonderful ancient site just down the road. It's very close to a massive field called Eastfield of crop circle fame. You got to go there. And the line courses right down here. It is so powerful. I could give a dowsing rod to a little kid and they would pick up the energy there. In fact, I was with a chap called Tony Robertson. He's really left-brain archaeologist. And he said, I want to douse a ley line. I don't think I'm going to pick anything up. And I thought, well, I won't take him to Avebury because there's a lot going on there. I'll take him on top of Adam's Grave and we'll do some dowsing on here. And he didn't want to talk to me beforehand. And I know Matthew Williams was also on that program, who was speaking, I think, tomorrow. And so I'm stood next to Tony, half praying to the goddess. Rod's cross sort of prayer, and my hair whiplashed him twice, so I got asked to put a hood on, but here he got the most amazing, powerful reaction. And I know these two people have been out with me at the front to Adam's Grave and Dalstad as well. But here in the landscape, this is where you can attune to the powers of communication, to all of the attributes the ancient astrologers put on the planet Mercury. We can expand our consciousness there. We can expand the way that we can communicate there, not just in the written or spoken word, but like as Mary Rodwell was saying, to get messages from other beings. So it's of no surprise to me that the whole of the crop circles, the ones that have really changed people's lives, have fallen in the orbital section of Mercury, linking us to the higher communication levels. And a wonderful temple space, which was north of Avebury, it no longer exists now. It was smashed to pieces in 1746. And this is a copyright of the Bodleian Library, but we're not going to tell them that here. It was a massive concentric circle. You've got Silbury Hill on the ley in the distance. And despite the fact that only one stone remains, this stone here, that every single stone got ripped from its Neolithic birthplace, an air of feminine power still lingers, like mist upon the land, perceptible that you can tune into. And when I was researching Venus here, I met this really amazing old guy. He lived in the village all of his life, and I was telling him all about Venus and, this wonderful temple that existed there. And he said, do you know what? He said, that's really weird you're talking about Venus, because most of the kids born in this village are all girls. So the symbolism, again, stays in the landscape, and it whispers to us across eons of time if we have ears to listen and eyes that see. So that's Venus in the landscape. And our ancient ancestors also wanted to depict Mars in the landscape as well. And Mars is an incredible planet because Venus represents the divine feminine, and this side is the divine feminine. And if you go on further on down the ley, you come to a place called Marden. Den is an old English word meaning settlement, and Mar is Mars. We have the settlement of Mars. And this was a gigantic superhenge. Anyone been to Avebury? Yeah. Well, you think Avebury's big. This was much bigger than Avebury. This was what's called a superhenge. It was where the element of earth round here, Hang on, Matthew did say too if that happened. Yay! This is all an earthen enclosure here, and this is a river coming round here. And this was the sister mound to Merlin's mound and Silbury. It was a massive organ generator again. But an antiquarian came round and he said, I'm going to put a shaft down this. The geology changes at Adam's grave. The ancients knew all about geological changes. This is green sand, so it's not like the chalk blocks of Silbury Hill. And they put a shaft down it and it collapsed, so it no longer exists. They wiped this planet and its orbital path and this superhenge off the face of the Earth, and just bumps remain now. So this ley system has been literally attacked. But when we go further on down the ley, we come to, like I said earlier, the planet of Jupiter at Castley Camp. And this is another massive mound close to Stonehenge. And it is very, very big. And again, it has that layering of organic, inorganic, and organic, which generates a lot of energy. And it's right where, if you were in the skies, as we'll see in a moment, where Jupiter would be. Now, this is on MOD land. Yeah? From this moment forth in the landscape on the ley, you're surrounded by the MOD. It literally owns all of that landscape. It's the equivalent to like the American Area 51. And you've really got to be very careful when you start to investigate the ancient sites on Salisbury Plain, because if you see a red flag flying, that means like missiles are going over your head. So it can be quite frightening. And you've heard the MC Busty Taylor. Well, he came out with me for the day to investigate Salisbury Plain, because there's some very unusual sites on Salisbury Plain. And Busty said, we're going to drive down here. And I was going, look, mate, there's a red flag flying down there. We can't go there. And he's going, no, it's okay, it's okay. And so I had one of those real wobbles, like, well, I'm getting out of the car, I'm not going down there. And he's going, oh, okay. So we got back in the car, we went to this ancient site. It's massive. Archaeologists tell you that West Kennet and East Kennet are the biggest long barrows in Wessex. They are not. On Salisbury Plain, you've got gigantic monuments. And the really weird thing about some of these gigantic long barrows on Salisbury Plain is, in the 1970s to the 1990s, the MOD used it as ramps to test their tanks out on. And there was an archaeologist I've studied with, because I have studied archaeology with Wessex archaeologists at the University of Bath, so I can speak their language, although they know I'm a mystic. And they say there's a really weird thing about these barrows. As much as the tanks have gone across them, they've never eroded. They're still dead flat like that. Again, it's the way that they were constructed. So when we see these ancient sites on Salisbury Plain, we need to go there and really claim back our power of going to these ancient sites. Just be very careful if a red flag flies. When the white flag flies, you're okay. And then we come to Stonehenge on this massive ley line system. Yeah? And Stonehenge is surrounded by military camp after military camp after military camp after military camp. You have Lark Hill a mile away. You have Bulford Camp. You have Warminster. It is literally surrounded by military activity. It's a low-fly zone, so the military can go really low over the Stonehenge environs. So they really have capitulated that. And as Busty may tell you later, it was clear that the MOD know about the UFOs and they're invited into their camp because it's been witnessed by Busty and others, a UFO flying into Portendown. And Portendown's our nuclear biological centre. But Stonehenge has some very strange history in its own right, because you can't see it now, because it really saddens me that, English heritage allow all of this to cover some of the stones, because if you're on the sanctity of the inner side of Stonehenge and you have a really good discerning eye and you know where to look, then there's a big square plaque. Yeah, and now, unfortunately, it's been overgrown. And this square plaque was recorded in ancient times. by people like Edward Duke, Mason, it's a Mason who discovered this ley line, like William Stukely in the 1746 that wrote a lot about Stonehenge and Avebury, a Mason, and like the earlier antiquarian before him, John Aubrey, a Mason again. But what they recorded was they found a very strange metal plaque, but they couldn't figure out what metal it was. It was kind of shiny. They didn't know whether it was lead. They didn't know what it was, and it had really strange hieroglyphic writing all over it. And in fact, they put it to the most learned people of the time and said, you know, hey, what does this mean? We traded with Greece. We knew what the French writing was like, and it was said to be completely foreign. Or we could say maybe alien, or maybe Druidic, maybe a lost language. But nonetheless, that plaque was recorded standing at Stonehenge. But unfortunately, you can't see it these days because of all of the green growth there. But Stonehenge incorporates, again, so much astronomical activity. There's a blue stone circle on the inside of the trilithons, and this is it represented in John Michel's Sacred Geometry of the New Jerusalem. And if you take the diameter of the blue stone circle, it is 79.20 inches precise. And if you start a multiple game, and John Michel was a really good mathematician, then it equates to the diameter of the Earth. So a lot was encoded into these ancient sites, onto these ancient ley lines. And I thought, well, if Edward Duke just put the 7 known planets of his era onto that ley line through the text that he was reading, what if I extended that ley line? Would there be the planets unknown until about the 1700s and the 1930s, such as Neptune, Uranus, and Pluto? And lo and behold, on the ley line, you have exactly where they should be ancient sites. You have Bellisnap here, a fine Longbarrow in Gloucester. And if you haven't been there, I really recommend you to go there, representing the orbital path of Uranus. And here on the south coast, we have the planet Neptune. Right, and Neptune is Lord of the Seas, and literally the ancient sites there overlook the sea there. And well, I've got a really nice picture of Bellisnap that we took on a very large pole to give you an idea of what this ancient site looks like. And the ley goes right the way down its axis line here, really bestowing that site with very powerful energies, because Uranus represents intuition and a sense of being really aware of other dimensions. And if you go there, these are the gateways to the planetary energies that you can tap into. And Bellisnap at the side has chambers as well that I'm sure were not used just to put in burial deposits like archaeologists would have us believe. Neptune's site is, like I say, overlooking the seas here. So it is clear that the ancients were fully aware of all of the planets in their era. They put them on a huge ley line, represented each sacred site a planet above. So I said to a friend of mine called Rodney Hale, and he works with people like Andrew Collins with his Cygnus alignment. I said, I wonder if what time, what era were those planets in that precise pattern in the heavens above? And what Rodney came up with was some interesting dates. I don't think these are the dates that the sites were built. I think this is when they were really activated, and this is when our ancient ancestors went to these sites. And one is 2746 BC. The planets came into alignment then, reflecting where they were in the landscape. And again, there was another match. And these dates are the exact dates where you have a lot of activity at Stonehenge and Avebury alike. And we see 3083 BC, when again, they're in near enough alignment like that. So I'm sure that this is when the whole of that ley system becomes completely activated. And if you look to how Himmler used the ley systems of Poland, for example, and how they engineered all of the concentration camps, more importantly their headquarters, then they are activated by planetary energies as well, just like they created in the Stonehenge environs. So we must think about more than the ley than just a straight line. These are linking heaven to earth, and they're places where we can go to attune to these planetary associations, as indeed Himmler did, and as indeed our ancient ancestors did before us. So we can look at ancient sites as being a key link to the heavens above, and about activation. So one of my passions is ley lines, and also I investigate earth energies as well, because I'm a second generation dowser and water diviner. And I'm going to show you some different things about water as well, and earth energies. Now I want you to think, okay, we've got ley lines, and I'm going to show you some really powerful earth energy patterns. What happens if you put a stone in to literally plug it into the grid, so to speak? Stones start to behave in a particular manner that I will share with you. And when we look for water, like I said, I'm a water diviner, yeah. And my late father inherited a lot of surveys by a master dowser called Guy Underwood. And Guy Underwood investigated ancient sites. He was a very, very good water diviner. Bath's water, Bradford-upon-Avon's water, it's all down to these excellent water diviners. Now, they look for a particular pattern in the landscape, and it's this spiral pattern called a geospiral. It means it's the electromagnetic field of deep, deep underground water, but not the sort of water that we're familiar with, because geologists tell us, rightly so, and don't we know it in the UK, the rain falls down from the skies, and it fills up the aquifers of the underground streams, of the underground lakes. Of course it does. That's one type of water. But water diviners have known for centuries that there's another type of water. There's a beautiful, pure type of water that is born within the planetary body of Mother Earth, where this water breaks through to the surface. That's your medicinal spring, where that water was bored in antiquity. That's your holy well. It has a medicinal quality, yeah? And we have, in Wiltshire, a lot of moneyed people. We have the Rothschilds, for example, and I can tell you that they do not drink normal water. They have spent a fortune boring down to the yin aquifers. That's the water that is born deep within the earth. And Dr. Gerald Pollack, he's come out with a book called The Fourth Phase of Water. And it's great for a water diviner like me, because it's almost like science is catching up with ancient law. And he states categorically that water under high pressure that comes through fissures in the earth and breaks through has a different quality, a different structure, and it's H3O2. Now, all ancient sites at the esoteric center, that's not the geometrical center of an ancient site, at the near center, you will always have this energy pattern. Now, the powers, again, the shadow governments, call them what you will, it's not the aquifer that they're really interested in, unless they want to drink nice water, which they do. It's the electromagnetic field that is the most powerful, and it generates this pattern like this, and it is very, very powerful. It emits a very strong frequency as well. And again, it's about the electromagnetic things, not the physical quality of water. And if we look to places like Stonehenge, the altar stone at Stonehenge isn't in the center, it's in the off-center, in the esoteric center here. And that's really tuning into the geospiral pattern. I mean, for example, as well, I'm not going to say to you guys, do you watch Downton Abbey, but my mum does. Yeah, my mum loves Downton Abbey. And you know, when you see all the posh people's houses, for example, you go down a sweeping drive, don't you? It's a kind of design canon of moneyed people, yeah? And you then go round in a big circle and you sweep back out. That's because they're looking for the esoteric center of their property. And it's the esoteric center that if you're near a spiral pattern, or you can make a frequency of a spiral pattern, you will kind of, stay wealthy, healthy, and wise. And this is what the ancients knew, that this frequency here emits such a strong signal. And again, when we look to this geospiral pattern under massive amount of water, yeah, I'm talking huge, huge lakes now, you get a threefold pattern. And the threefold pattern looks like this. You have the spiral pattern in the middle, you have a circle like this, and we'll find out that this is what the ancients were looking for. Then you have this massive halo like this. This is an intense electromagnetic field. And Stonehenge is placed into that electromagnetic field as pyramids are, as Avebury is, and numerous ancient sites worldwide. And again, it's about controlling to a certain degree the electromagnetic frequencies. And when we look to the circular pattern independently, yeah, and it's here. This is what decrees a shape of a stone circle. You have this massive energy field here, and you have an inner shadow field here. And remarkably, these two kind of circular shapes interact with one another. So this part of the pattern here jumps to over here, and this is where standing stones are over here. And it's an amazing experience to feel the earth force beneath your feet. And if you happen to be up quite late and you're an insomniac, and you happen to be at Avebury round about sort of between 1 and 3 in the morning, and you stand in between two stones like this with your bare feet on the ground, you almost feel like a tidal force go under your feet. I often talk to the security guards at Stonehenge, and I said to them, well, one day, why don't you just go in between, about 1 and 3, in between the blue stones, and see what you get? And these are the kind of really kind of left-brain, burly guys, and they, when I went about 2 to 3 months later, they said, we felt it. We felt the earth force beneath our feet. And it's really interesting to note that when Stonehenge became really active, leading up to 2012, no matter if you paid for your private access, you pay the dollar, you pay 21 quid to English Heritage, and you get to go in with a group of 26 after hours. But you used to be able to touch the stones. Stonehenge became activated. And the moment it became activated, it was denial. You can't even touch the stones. That's even on private access. And if you do, you can get kind of slung out. But anyway, I thought, you know, it's activated. The whole planetary alignment is eking up towards a new era, and what if I just put like my third eye and have a massive kind of interaction with the greater trillathon like that, and bear in mind I'm leading a group. So anyway, I said, talk to the security guards, I want to do this, and I kind of went like that, and I just this massive download. Now I can't speak for 20 minutes, and I'm looking around at the group and trying to point things out on bits of paper, and this is why there's a new visitors centre. The only vein left to Stonehenge pretty soon is one track. It's an ancient ley line, yeah, and they want that even cordoned off now. So go there just for devilment and drive down by the Cursors Monument, because if we don't do that, English Heritage will claim every single part of Stonehenge. So do that, and I do that regularly. I was there just on Sunday, again just for devilment, to go past there to say this is our right. So this is, hasn't come up on that one. Yeah, here it is. This is the sacred underground water, Avebury and Stonehenge alike, all emitting those spiral patterns, those energy fields we saw, and they tend to be focused on these places here where you have kind of energy streams and a geospiral here, and you have all of this sacred water at Stonehenge, and these stones are plugged into all of this. Yeah, and they're plugged into it, and like I say, we're going to have a look at how the stones behave. But if we can remember that kind of outer halo shape, all ancient peoples, they knew that this had protective qualities. And like I say, you know, places like Downton Abbey, for example, they're all protected by this earth energy pattern. It's called a secondary halo. And a lot of ancient cities were following this pattern. The city of London, it's its own country in a way, has this pattern here. It represents the underground water. And in ancient Chinese law, water and money are interchangeable, yeah? And it is no mistake that old Peking, modern-day Beijing, is sited at the esoteric center of China because it represents wealth if you have this underground water there. And In Chelsea at the moment, I don't know if you're aware of it, but they're building down 3 stories. Yeah, it's really wobbling, the water table in London. There's an Olympics-size swimming pool 3 stories below in Chelsea. And there's people really tapping into these energy supplies. But okay, let's put a standing stone now into one of these energetic fields, and let's see what happens. And it was my late father did a lot of research on these standing stones of Avebury, and they generate, once they're plugged in, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bands of energy. The stone is in the ground, so it has 1, 2 here, just like our chakra system. This is a megalithic chakra system. And this band here is really, really intriguing because it sends a signal to that stone, to that stone, to that stone, to that stone, creating a massive electromagnetic field on the inside here. And this band here is really, really intriguing because Busty Taylor and myself have been using some equipment to see what is happening with that band. And because my late father and people said, if you put your hands on the band like this, with your feet slightly apart, you will feel a force push you into the stone or a force away from the stone. And there was anecdotal evidence coming across is, I feel lighter, I feel heavier. So we thought we'd take some specialized weight testing equipment and see what happens. And Busty went on there, and within 6 seconds, he gained 2 stone in weight. It changed his weight. Move away from the stones, and your weight goes back to normal. I always want to lose a couple of pounds. And I said, well, I might be the one that's a bit lighter in this, Busty. And it turned out I started to lose weight, yeah. Now, I'm sure that the ancients were aware of how to manipulate this weight band here so they could transport the stones across the landscape. Because let's face it, moving stone wasn't a problem to our ancient ancestors. It's only the archaeologists think it was a problem. But a chap called Rodney that I mentioned earlier, he said to me, do you know what, I can help you prove these, Maria. And because I was always the butt of a joke in the Red Lion pub, because I used to, I don't know why, do tours with archaeologists. I went to, through the university with them. Anyway, and each night afterwards, it was always everything so touchy, feely with you, Maria. You can't prove a goddamn thing. And I listened to that, and then I had 2 pints of Stella at the bar. Suddenly, I have more courage in me. So I then say, I bet you 100 quid I can prove this. And they went, game on, sort of thing. So Rodney came with me, and what Rodney discovered, he was testing out for the signals and using his laptop, and each time that he made this audible. So he made it like go zzz, then go deadly quiet, and then zzz, and then deadly quiet again. And then he said to me, do you know the frequency of that is 18 hertz, Maria? And I said, oh, wow. And he said, do you know what that means? And I went, well, no. And he said, you hear at 20. What if our ancient ancestors, not surrounded by electromagnetic smog like we are today, e-smog, that they could hear the sound of the stones? I think they could. I think they had a totally different way of seeing an ancient site like Stonehenge than we do. And I know Sarah Goodley yesterday mentioned Harry Oldfield. And I'm really pernickety about where energy is in the landscape. I'll say it's there and it ain't there, it's there and it ain't there, sort of thing. So Harry Oldfield's colleague called Merv came to Wayland Smithy with me, and we had a look at this wonderful site. It's called a Longbarrow by archaeologists, and I predicted that this part here would have energy signals, and these stones wouldn't, because they're not plugged into the Earth energy system. And it comes out in the color order of the chakra sequence, yeah? So you can't hear the stones, and you can't see the energies that they emit, but you are being bathed in a particular type of intense energy. So Rodney, he's really clever. He took 2,000 meters of the finest copper to measure any difference in my body and in my auric field. And this is what he got. He got a constant, what's called the Schumann resonance, the heartbeat of Gaia, around 7 hertz in the background that makes you feel kind of chilled out. And this is the coil alone here. Then I step into the coil, and there's slight activity there. But as soon as I lean my hands against the energy band, and we're using band 3 here, the electromagnetic energy shoots up. We wanted to know then, what's the energy doing in my body? And Rodney kept me monitored day after day after day, and we found out for 60 seconds of activity, putting your hands against the stones, that energy is staying with you for 4 days, and it's expanding you and expanding you and expanding you. And this is how the money people live, yeah. They have complete expansion of their auras, and it gives you a sense of strength. And because I was a little bit nervous talking to the Basis Project, because I'm normally around Earth mysteries sort of people, and I thought, I'm the black sheep of the talk today. What can I do? I'll quickly mention Himmler at the beginning. And then I thought, well, to fit in. I just want to fit in sometimes. And then I thought, well, I grew up in America. I spent from about the age of 10 to 15 going through the dreadful American highs, probably why I've got attitude now. But I really loved some of the sites, and I fell in love with them. And one site that really touched my heart recently, and it was one of the first sites to be wiped out by the Masons that took over America, was a very sacred site to the ancient Native Americans. Although the Native Americans said, we didn't build this. This was built by the kings of kings, yeah? And it's a pentagon type of shape, which we can see here. It has the sacred enclosure around here. And it represented the 5 senses I'll talk about in a moment. But the designer of the Pentagon, George Birdstrong, he lived next door to this monument. Yeah? He knew what this was like. He recorded this, and this is where he got the inspiration from. But the later Native Americans that used this site used it for war purposes. It was to increase the power of the warrior. It was to increase the ability for you to hear, see, and smell your enemy. Yeah? And if you could, you'd activate it through sacrifice. Twice a year, blood had to be spilled to keep the Pentagon going. So every spring and every fall, there was this grisly sacrifice there to enhance the warriors of America. Right, brilliant. Back on. Moving on fast from that grisly rites of the Pentagon. Well, when we look to kind of ancient wisdom and we think, well, where did the ancients first activate these kind of triple patterns of the underground water and the electromagnetic fields, then we can naturally turn to Atlantis. And if we use Plato's accounts and we look to what the city, the metropolis of Atlantis looked like, it was very, very circular. And it was really full of water. In fact, Plato describes the city as having 2 very sacred springs, really pure. One was hot and one was cold. That's a yin-yang aquifer, yeah, working in harmony, creating a massive, really harmonic energy field. So we can see that around here, this is all of the water generating a massive field. And more than that, when you live above this type of underground water, when you drink this sort of water, you really become clear in the mind. And I grew up with apartheid, and it was gross. You know, I never went to South Africa, but my dad used to invite people over from South Africa, and they felt the coloured people there really really cut off from the rest of society. And my dad said, I can't change the politics, but what I can do for you is we can get you on the most purest water. And given time, when you start to live above this, you start to drink it, you'll become clear of sight, and changes happen when you interact with this water. And that's what he did for a couple of towns there. We taught the people how to water divine them. Now, when we start to really have a good look at Atlantis, it's 15 miles in diameter. Well, I read John Michel, I quoted him earlier, and I thought, I wonder if Atlantis somehow gets the whole of the diameter of the Earth, in its sacred geometry. And indeed it does. You start to multiply it, and it's registered the Earth again, because you see, in ancient design canons, that's what people in large houses live by, is harmonic maths. You find the earth energies, and then you place your construct upon it. Then you bring in the mathematics of the diameter of the earth, or the moon, or Mars, depending on what type of energy you want. And it is a real shocking sadness that during the building period of the Victorians, for example, that the powers that be plugged in our orphanages and our very old-style Victorian prisons into a really ghastly grid system. It turns anyone slightly paranoid. It's called the shadow system of the sixth global grid system. It is not nice. And if you go to Stonehenge, when you all go in your cars down that track and go, yay, to the freedom of Stonehenge, go through Shrewton. It's a little village on the outskirts of Stonehenge. And it has what's called a blind house, yeah? And a blind house was an old-style prison that they used to put, people in when they were awaiting trial and things like that. It has no windows at all. It's always by running water. And it's plugged into that negative grid system. So it's really terrible. It will make you feel really, really, really paranoid. And I used to go out many years ago with the son of Wormwood Scrub's governor, who had a massive drink problem every night. He used to guzzle down all of this whiskey. So we thought when he got really wrecked one night, he had the plans of Wormwood Scrubs in, and I was going to, take them. Well, I took them actually out of the briefcase and gave them to my dad to see what he could divine from it, because he was an exceptional diviner. I mean, I'm pretty good, but he was very good. And again, he looked at it very closely and realized that all of the key points on those prison systems throughout London and throughout the southwest are plugged into a negative grid system. And it is a crime, because, do you know what? We can live in harmony again with the earth, because what is all this ancient wisdom if you can't apply it to a modern generation? So my dream vision is we claim back death rights. We start to bury our dead like the New World Order does, because they look for particular grid patterns, they look for particular energies, because they believe in what's called earth karma. And that's all the crap that you've done through your life. You're a banker, and all of that. You bury yourself in a particular way, and everything's fine. And that's what they do. And they think the earth will release you of your karma to some degree. And I met a chap in 2006, and he was saying, I really want to build some very unusual graves, and can you give me some inspiration? I said, too right. We can bring back these ancient burial rites of what the other people use, and we can start to design them based on crop circles and ancient wisdom. And this is a quick plug for my new book coming out. I thought, God, I'll put that one in. It's a pretty cover. And here we can see it. We did all of this. This is all done on the ancient rites, because make no mistake, the Habsburg, for instance, huge moneyed royal family of ancient Europe, never been voted in a democratic way, yet they rule part of Europe still. They're plugged into that system. So here, and it's great where it is. It's in Liverpool, overlooking the Mersey. Yeah, I thought, yes, that's so good. And they've got people that are going to be the guardians here. They're going to be buried in a vertical manner, and there'd be 2 portals of people guarding it for the future. So that's our vision, to bring back the death rites, because there was an antiquarian called Sir Richard Coulthall. And he excavated a lot of the barrows, and he found very large skulls, what his grandfather did, like those really elongated skull things. But more than that, they dug into one very close to Stonehenge, and when the workmen, because they're the ones who are doing the digging, the poshies are doing the looking, and they put the skull out, and they said it had hair still on it, and the teeth was white as snow. So Coulter demanded categorically they start to smash that skull up. So the workman does as he's told, and he smashes the skull, but it doesn't break. And Colt, and they're dropped tools now. They say, hey, we're freaked out by this. We're not smashing this skull. And Colt said, give me, the mallet hammer thing. And it took his third attempt to smash it. That is because they're on these ancient energy patterns that preserves life. This is the whole thing. If you live in harmony with the earth, your life can be preserved. And I'm really proud to say that I'm working with a young architect in London in some rough parts, actually, and we're bringing back these ancient rites, and we've got all the little kiddie parks now on really relaxing earth energies in London, because if we moved our hospitals to the healing harmonic energies, if we moved our orphanages to places of empowerment, because pulpits in churches, they're put on crossing points of a particular grid system that expands your ability to talk. It's a great place to go to. Templars used it all of the time. What if kids that are dyslexic, I'm dyslexic, and what if people with communication problems, stammers, they're plugged in, they're places where they live or where they go are plugged into the earth. Because it's time now where we can really change our lives and we can live in harmony with the earth. And that's my dream. Thank you.